TrekProfiles Podcast, Episode 31, recorded January 2020. This is the Trek Profiles Podcast, where each episode we sit down with a Star Trek fan. We hear their Star Trek story and try to figure out why in the world we both love Trek so much. I'm John, your intrepid host of this whole enterprise, and I welcome you to this, the Trek Profiles Podcast, Episode 31. If you wish to get in touch with us, you can reach us at feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter at TrekProfiles. Warning! As we record this, we have reached Episode 2 of Star Trek Picard, so all previous Trek content up to and including that point is fair game and may be discussed during this episode. You have been warned, human. As always, my trusty sidekick and co-host is the smashingly smart, surprisingly smug, yet scandalously sanctimonious M5 Multitronic Unit. Greet the listeners, M5.
All systems standing by.
M5, what messages do we have?
Messages on screen.
This show is an independent podcast. If you'd like to support us, the best way to do that is to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform. Also, you can rate and review us in iTunes or Google if you would like to do that. We would appreciate it very much. There are some lightly edited outtakes and bonus material at the end of this episode. They will come after the ending audio cards. Enjoy them or not, as you choose. A little production note, the very next episode that you get after this one will be a little bit different. I'm not going to say too much about it, so stand by for something different. Alright, let's do the Kobayashi Maru results from episode 29 with Maggie McNeil. Question 1, attend movie night on the NX-01 or attend Parissa Squares on the 1701D. Maggie selected the cinema, and so did you, my darling listeners, by 68 to 32%. Question 2. Time to take a vacation. Visit Planet Argelius or Planet Risa. Maggie was solidly behind Argelius, but y'all said Jamaharoned accept no substitute and picked Risa by 79 to 21%. Question 3. If you went to sickbay, would you rather see Dr. Phlox, Dr. Bashir, or Dr. Pulaski? Now, Maggie picked Pulaski, but in the Twitter poll, you all clearly ignored the lessons of the Augments and Space Seed and picked Bashir by 53%. Phlox got 26%, and Pulaski got 21%. So be it. Question 4. Choose your time travel trip. Have an adventure with the TOS crew in 1986 San Francisco or the Voyager crew in 1996 SoCal. My guest picked San Francisco, but SoCal seemed like the choice of the Tweeples by 56 to 44%. And finally, question 5. Would you rather arm wrestle a Gorn or thumb wrestle a Mugatu? Maggie picked the Mugatu, but the listeners picked the Gorn by 69 to 31%. It was a merciful and quick victory. As always, after each episode is released, I post these questions on Twitter, so follow me there at TrekProfiles, and you can have your say on this episode's questions. Let's do a little bit of listener feedback. This one comes from Alex Perry on iTunes. He says, Trek Profiles is a great podcast. Each month, sometimes more frequently, John hosts a Star Trek fan to discuss why they love the franchise. There have been loads of interesting stories from a lot of interesting people so far. It'll make you think, and it'll also help deepen your own love and appreciation for the Star Trek franchise. Highly recommended, end quote. Well, thank you, Alex, for that very kind review. I appreciate it very much. That's going to do it for messages and communiques. Let's move on. M5, run the intelligence profile for this week's guest, and let's do the show.
M5 acknowledges.
Her captain is Janeway. Her favorite character is a toss-up between B'Elanna Torres and Seven. Her favorite guest character is Ro Laren. Her favorite ship is the Raven. Why? Because it's important to Seven, of course. She is from Connecticut, North America, Earth, in Sector 001. It's Anika Dane. Welcome, Anika, and thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you. I'm very excited.
Anika, are you a Star Trek fan?
I am. I'm a huge Star Trek fan. I have been a Star Trek fan since I was very small. And I don't really remember a time where it wasn't an important part of my life.
What's the first Star Trek you remember?
So My first exposure to Star Trek was actually a little bit strange. My father worked at Wesleyan University. He was the directing professor for theater. And one of his thesis students did Balance of Terror as a stage production for their senior thesis. And I was maybe 8. And I was a Star Wars fan. So my father thought that I should go see this weird Star Trek play that was being put on by his student. And so I loved it. It was amazing to me. I fell in love with Mr. Spock immediately. And it was done as if it was a television series. They had a scrim screen in front so that all of the actors were behind, and it was lit, and it would get dark and it would fade in and out just as it was on screen. They had commercial breaks. And so that was my first exposure to Star Trek. And then my father said, hey, it's actually a television series, and there you can go watch more of them. So that was very exciting to me. And then Next Generation started, and I got to see new Star Trek every week, me and my brothers, and that was it. It was all over. I was a fan for life.
I have to ask more questions about this Balance of Terror thing. So did they have like 2 different sets that were going on at the same time?
So again, because it was, and I was 8. So this is all like in my head and in my memories, but who knows how it actually happened. But there's only like it's a bottle episode. There's really only like the bridge scene, and then there's some scenes in engineering. So engineering, I remember being on one side of the stage, and we were actually sitting on stage, so we were looking down at where the audience would normally sit, was where it was going on, so that there would be like this perspective. And so the lights would go down, and then like part of the stage would come up, and it would be engineering, and the lights would go down, and the center would come up again, and it would be the bridge, and like the Romulans were somewhere else. I don't know where they were. And then the commercial breaks were in front of the screen, so that they were doing, and it was like this coffee commercial, and it was there were like 4 commercial breaks or something, and each one was another like act of this tiny coffee play about 2 people in love.
Oh my goodness.
So I have very fond memories of this.
Oh, do you remember if they did the wedding scene?
I don't remember. What I remember is Spock and Romulans, and that they were the same. And I remember engineering being off on a different side, and I remember the coffee people. Like that's what sticks with me the most are the mechanics, the fact that Spock was amazing, and the commercial.
So is it Spock that was really the thing that got you into it more than anything else?
It was. And you asked what my favorite alien race is, and I said Romulans, and I think it's like from the very beginning. It was this idea of there being an alien, an enemy who was also very much like the good guys, and that they were like mirrors of each other.
So are you up to date on Star Trek Picard?
I am. I got up at 4:00 in the morning to watch the 2nd episode.
So it seems like we're going to get a deep dive into the Romulans. Is that exciting for you?
I have been waiting for that my entire life. So I was excited when they started announcing Romulans for Star Trek Picard. I really feel like they've not done well by my favorite race. Like the Next Generation didn't really, it was kind of bad for the Romulans, all told. And so I'm really excited to see them, getting to see different types of Romulans. Like we always only ever saw the baddest ones and the craziest ones. So I'm excited to see all of the different ones and how they interact. And I'm already in love with every single one. Laris is amazing. Narek is his real name, but I call him Kylo Romulan, is amazing.
Kylo Romulan.
I love him so much. And now he has a big sister, so it's like, oh my gosh, this is literally a Star Trek series made for me.
Oh, that's wonderful. I always felt like in TNG they wasted poor Andreas Katsoulis as Tomalak. He's a tremendous actor, a tremendous talent, and all he ever got the chance to do was to like twirl his Romulan mustache and shake his fist and make threats.
And he's so memorable anyway. You know, he's like, you know exactly, like you say his name, and I'm like, I know exactly who Tomalak is, and I can imagine him in the screen like leering, and yet he never got an arc or a story or anything like Garrick does.
Yeah, we didn't get any of that for the Romulans. I've said from time to time that the one character I thought we were going to get that was when that Romulan showed up on Deep Space Nine to operate the cloaking device.
Yeah, and even he on Deep Space Nine, which loves to take a random side character with no name and turn them into like a star of the show. Even there, they didn't get that treatment.
I know, we only got 2 episodes with her and then she was gone, without any explanation, which was too bad. I wanted more. And it looks like we're going to get it. So that's pretty cool. So when was this that you saw Balance of Terror? Is this like mid 80s or
it was right it was right before Next Generation started.
Okay, so that would have been like 86 or so.
Yeah, right.
86, 87, somewhere in there. Okay. So did you go back and start looking at TOS before TNG came on, or did you just give a fresh start with TNG? What did you decide to do?
I did see TOS first. It was on at like 10 or 11 at night. And again, I was 9 at most. And I had to convince my mother to let me stay up and watch Star Trek. And she watched with me once. It was the Galileo 7. And maybe 20 minutes in, she turned to me and she was like, this is the most boring thing I've ever done in my life. How can this be what you want to do? And I was like, no, it's Star Trek. It's the best. And like, to be honest, Galileo 7 was boring, especially to a 9-year-old. But I like threw down. I was like, no, this is the best show ever. So that one I remember. And then I remember Obsession, because I was terrified of it and I didn't want to go to bed afterwards because I thought that the cloud was going to like come through the heating ducts and get me.
A reasonable assumption.
So those ones I remember I have strong memories of watching before getting into Next Generation. And I know I saw others because, again, it was on. I doubt my mother allowed me to watch on a school night. So I'm not going to say I watched it every night, but probably every Friday I watched Star Trek at 10 p.m. And who knows what order it was in at that point, because I think it was on PBS. It wasn't even like on a regular channel. It was very random syndication time.
Right. It would have been on some weirdo UHF station or something.
So we only got like 4 channels at most. So.
And what part of the country was this?
Connecticut. I live in the town I grew up in. I haven't left. I'm still here.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing.
Yes, and I work at Wesleyan University where my father worked.
Oh, so you're all in now. You're in like the family business.
That's right.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's a very rare thing today. It's really something else.
Yeah, it's funny. And when I was in between, when I was a kid and when I wanted to leave for college, for example. Like college age, I was like, I need to get out of Middletown. This is horrible. I'm definitely not going to Wesleyan because I need to get out and see the world. And for a long time, I sort of wanted to leave, even after I came back after college. But the longer I stayed, the more I realized that I'm very happy here and it's actually a great place to be. And I never have to wait in line for a table. It's not urban, but it's also not rural. It's barely suburban. We're considered a city here in Middletown. I would not consider us a city, but we are. So it has like this little, vibe to it. So yes, it's strange and it's weird, and I didn't choose it exactly. It's just, a circumstances happened. But now I've been working at Wesleyan for 12 years, and I live at the end of the street that I grew up on the other end. Like, I grew up over here, and I live at this end, and it's great. I'm very happy.
Oh, that's marvelous. So, if you were growing up in a smaller place, were you able to find and connect with other Star Trek fans, or was it something you just sort of kept under the covers?
So I was able to connect with other people at that time. This was sort of the height of when Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager were all happening. There were a lot of conventions. They were everywhere, even in Hartford, Connecticut. And so I was able to go to, like, they wouldn't be in Middletown, but they would be in Hartford or New Haven, and I would convince my father to drive me there. And my first Star Trek convention was right after Deep Space Nine premiered. Mm-hmm. And so it was January in New England. It was freezing.
Delightful.
And he dropped me and my little brother off at the hotel. It was like in a Marriott, like a Hartford Marriott,
right.
Random. And with no money, we didn't have a cell phone then. It's like 90-something. And just, we went into the convention. We wandered in. I paid nothing to get into the convention. I paid nothing for any of the things. I definitely got an autograph from Alexander Siddig, who, again, like maybe 3 episodes had aired at this point of Deep Space Nine. But I went up to him. I was a very bold child, and told him that he was going to be my favorite character because the Doctor was always my favorite character. Because up until that point there were 2, and it was true. And he said, that's great, and asked what, my brother was like 5, and said, oh, how are you doing? Where's your parents? And I explained that my mother had recently died. So I feel very bad for Alexander Siddig because he didn't want that information at his first convention from a small child and her even smaller brother. But instead of saying, I'm so sorry, or that, that's terrible, which is sort of what I was used to, that's not what you want to hear when you're in that place. And he said, it's so good of you to take care of your little brother. I can tell you're doing such a good job. And he is my favorite for life because of that small kindness that he doesn't remember, but I will remember forever.
And so I just want to understand, your dad dropped you off. Yep. And how old were you at this time, give or take?
I'm going to go with 14.
So you're 14, you're a 5-year-old, and you're at a convention by yourself in Hartford? Yep. That's awesome.
It was a different time. No one asked us. They just assumed that obviously they belong to somebody. These random children can't just be nobody's children. And I was 14, but I probably looked 11 at most. I've never looked my age. So it was but we were polite and good kids, I would say. And yeah. And
you got to enjoy the convention.
And we got to enjoy the convention. And a few years later, when I was in youth group with my church, I convinced my youth pastor to take us to see Patrick Stewart at another convention as our outing, as our Sunday afternoon outing.
As one does in church group.
As one does. I don't know. Again, I was a very bold child, and I just thought that was completely normal. And was obviously, they were always asking, what do you want to do with church group? And I said, I want to go see Patrick Stewart. He's going to be in Hartford. let's go see him. And we did. And there's another one where we didn't pay. We just wandered in. We wandered into the ballroom, which was packed, crazy packed with people. And we're in the back because everybody was already there. It was already going on. And so we just stood in the back and watched until he was finished. He's amazing. He's always amazing on stage. And then we left. And that was...
So you started going to conventions at a very young age. Have you kept up your convention-going attendance regularly or semi-regularly?
Semi-regularly. now that I do have to pay, it's expensive. But I do go to as many conventions as I can. Any that I can drive to, I really try to make a point of going, whether it is a Star Trek convention, which there really aren't any anymore. Like those very specific Star Trek conventions, other than Las Vegas, they don't happen as much.
Right. It's all very corporate now and sort of, it has to be like a big marquee event kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but like New York Comic Con, I will go to, there's a Kineticon, which I love, and I've actually presented panels. I like to present panels. And so I do that at as many conventions as I can do. Last year, I went to AwesomeCon in Washington, D.C., where one of my brothers lives, and that was great. And so I get to as many as I can get to, as many as I can afford, and I love, if I can somehow be a part of it in some way as a volunteer or as a panelist or, whatever, press, then I will do those as well.
So what do you present on?
So I present on my background is kind of eclectic. I was a theater major because my dad was a theater professor and I thought it was cool. But my performance thesis was actually a dance performance. And then my master's that I just finished in last May, I was in social sciences, and I was always sort of arts and psychology, sociology were always something that I was very interested in, and the merging of the two.
Okay.
So for my master's, for my final project for that, I actually studied Star Trek and how it relates to society, specifically in Star Trek's portrayal of post-traumatic stress, starting with the original series and going through Discovery.
So that sounds really interesting. I mean, what would be like maybe the top 5 episodes you would hit or movies in that discussion?
Well, I can give you a link that you can link your audience to that has my list. And I actually asked for suggestions when I was first starting this project because I wanted to know what other people also saw as episodes that dealt with it. And people were they were very helpful in telling me, and there were so many different ideas of what could possibly be considered trauma and what could be considered recovery. And so it was really great to see all of the different ways. I ended up focusing mostly on things that were related to the military. Because I had to break it down to something. And even though that's not really my version of trauma, I am not in the military. I've never been in the military. I'm not against the military, but I'm for peace. But there's a lot of research on the occurrences of post-traumatic stress in soldiers. And so my advisors were like, let's pick something that we can hone in on. And Starfleet is not a military organization, but it is based off of one.
Yeah, I would call it a paramilitary organization in a lot of ways. More like a police department. It's not exactly like an apt comparison, but something more like a fire department. Maybe think of it that way. It's not a military organization, but it has some of the trappings of it.
It has and the structures are some of, people assume, and they're correct, but they assume that a lot of why soldiers have to deal with trauma is because of what they're exposed to. And that's true. But the structures of the military help keep all of that at bay. So it's when they leave the military and don't have that structure and don't have anything else to put in its place is when they really start to have problems. And the structure of Star Trek, of Starfleet in Star Trek, is that same structure. And it is sort of we're keeping things, like Picard is actually a good example. So you asked for episodes, and I love Picard's arc with the Borg for this project because the show actually allows him to deal with it, and extends even all the way into First Contact. And so that's a really good arc. It's important to see how things, when you're studying something, you want to see how it changes over time. So specifically for my project, I studied family and First Contact for Picard. And then now in Star Trek Picard, we see him outside of Starfleet, and he's definitely depressed at the beginning. Like, he is dealing with a lot, and he's turned off from everything. He only has his emotional support Romulans. And
that should be a thing. These are I have an emotional support Romulan. You know, like I'm going to board a plane, right? Yes. With like a person in a suitcase. This is my emotional support Romulan.
So I could use some emotional support Romulans. I could also use a vineyard. Just put that out there. If anyone wants to leave me one, I'm up for it. But so I think it's really interesting to see Picard outside of the structure of Starfleet has trouble engaging with life. So other ones that I studied were Hard Time, was one that everyone really, really brought up. That's the one where O'Brien goes through like 30 years of trauma in a day.
Right, a memory implant.
Right, which apparently they're trying to make in reality now.
Yeah, that was just in the news. Yeah, just days ago as we record this.
Stop. But I also studied Extreme Risk because B'Elanna and her trauma is very, very important to me. And I love B'Elanna Torres, and I think that she actually has like the best character arc of everyone in Star Trek.
Oh, good. Well, let's say that we're gonna dive into that in a bit. I want to save that. So I want to go back to this thing that you've been presenting at these conventions.
Yes. And I should say that this whole post-traumatic stress thing is still, like, I haven't presented it at all. I would love to. But those are the things that I've been studying. Pop culture, how pop culture and sociology connect in many different ways. And then I also present on costuming, on how it is to be a teenage girl or the mom of a teenage girl, and other like feminist issues.
So we've talked a little bit about conventions. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that you're a bit of a cosplayer and a fandom stylist. So tell me about that.
So, yes, I've been doing cosplay forever. I have been dressing up forever. I love dressing up. And I don't need a event to do it. I just like to, create something every day. That's the fun for me. And I have created outfits. When I was little, I would put them on pillows. I didn't have mannequins, so I would put them on pillows and I would take pictures or I would draw. And so it's just something that I've always loved doing. And then I started cosplay, like full-on cosplay. It takes a lot of work. And I am I'm a barely beginner sewer. Like I can use a sewing machine. So without the help of other people who are better, and my ex-husband and my brother are like professionals, so they were helpful. But I can't create a amazing actual full-on cosplay by myself. So I got good at creating inspired outfits that were inspired by, say, Captain Kirk. And so I would look at Captain Kirk and I would say, well, he wears a gold top and black pants and boots, and he's kind of cocky, and these are like the traits of, like, I think about the traits of the character as well as the traits of the costume. So I look at the colors, I look at the line, I think about the attitude, I think about he has a Delta, right? Everybody in Star Trek has a delta. So that would be something that I could have a symbol of the delta in some way on my person. It doesn't have to be a pin that's like a brooch that's right on my chest. It can be earrings. It can be a necklace. It can be a hairband that has the delta. And it doesn't even need to be an official Star Trek Enterprise delta. It can be a triangle. It can be, but if it's the idea of that symbol, then that counts. And so I would wear a gold sweater and black pants and boots, cute little combat boots. I was very into like my Doc Martens. And I would wear triangle earrings, and I would carry around a cut the top of a hat off with the fluff part, and I would carry it around, and that would be my triple. And I would be Captain Kirk for the day. And so for 3 years now, I've been doing all of October as Coztober. So I do one of these inspired by fashion looks every day for October. And I take little pictures.
That's marvelous.
And I post them on Instagram, and it's amazing. It's so much fun for me. My daughter does it with me, and people at work, people will come every day just to see what I'm wearing that day.
So, but you mentioned your work, so you're out with your fandom at work, right?
Oh, yes.
You're right up there.
So I am very lucky that I work at a liberal arts university that is known for being nonconformist. So I can have whatever color hair I want, and I can wear outfits, crazy fandom-inspired outfits every day, and it's a treat for everyone. It's not anything that I get in trouble for. But yes, I am so... I have little bits of fandom everywhere. I have like a candy jar that's Batman, and I have an Iron Man pop, and I have my daughter's an artist, and so she's made me all sorts of things that I can hang up on my bulletin board. I have like a Force Ghost Anakin, and I have a little witch from Little Witch Academia. It's like me actually as a little witch in Little Witch Academia, and I have Chidi from The Good Place, and everything all over the place, and of course Star Trek. So I'm very well known at work for being the person who's like the first in line to see the new Star Wars movie, and will talk about whatever fandom you want to talk about. I'm there for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've got the costumes, but have you ever actually tried to do like an actual cosplay from the show, or is it just more of these inspired by kind of things?
I have a early Next Generation uniform, and so it was still inspired by, it wasn't a direct copy of Captain Killy from Star Trek Discovery.
Yes, of
and
course.
Tilly in the Mirror Universe, but it was not regular clothes. It was very much a costume, but it was not a direct replica, because I don't have the skills for a direct replica. People who do are amazing, but I do not. And so it was what I could do. But I'm very proud of it. And I wore that to Star Trek Las Vegas 2 years ago. And I have an Uhura uniform that's purchased.
So do you collect anything?
So I collect lots of things, but Star Trek doesn't have a lot of stuff. Or I should say, it doesn't have a lot of stuff that is the stuff that I like. So I have a lot of action figures, but they're more, I give them out at, like, when I do a panel at a convention, I'll give a couple to the audience as part of the panel, more than I keep them for myself and display them. And I have some books, and I have some autographs and things like that. But the things that I'm most proud of and excited to talk about you with are my plush animals.
Okay.
And so I actually have them here so you can see them.
Oh, that's great. Well, I don't record the
I know.
The video is not going anywhere.
This is only for you.
Oh, no, I'm getting a private thing. This is amazing.
But here is my tardigrade.
Oh my God, he's so cute.
He's so cute. He's good. Okay. Here is Livingston, the fish.
Livingston the fish, right? Whatever happened to Livingston? Is he dead on Viridian 2? I mean, what's going on? I don't know.
Fish don't live actually that long, turns out. Sorry. Then I have
way to crush my dreams there.
So those were mass produced, but these are the ones that are special. This is my Spock squid.
A Spock squid?
Yes,
okay.
So I'll describe this for other people. It is a handmade bright blue squid with a science delta.
A TOS science delta, yeah.
That's a Spock squid.
I have to ask about why he's a squid.
I don't know.
You don't think you're I saw you putting that down. You don't get to not talk about that, right? Yeah.
I saw this. It's from a convention. It was at Kineticon. They just had a table. And I was actually purchased for my daughter because she loved Spock so much, and I love that she loves Spock so much, and she loves squids. So this was clearly made for her. And then when she got to the age where she didn't want to like anything that mom likes anymore, and so she doesn't like Spock as much, she gave him back to me. There he is.
Okay, okay. I just wanted to be clear. You didn't sit down one day and say, "Wow, I really need a Spock squid." I mean, it was just, because as one might do.
Randomly made this.
By the way, you have to give me a picture of that, because that definitely has to go up on the show notes page, because that's awesome.
Okay, so this is Chakotay Bear.
Beautiful, beautiful. It's a teddy bear with the Chakotay head tattoo. Fantastic.
And then finally, I got to go to the Star Trek Discovery second season premiere in New York City. And after we watched the show, there was a party for the cast and the press, and which was amazing. I just want to say, if you ever can go to a party hosted by CBS, you should.
Okay.
And at this party, they had these pillows of the Star Trek Discovery Delta, and it says Star Trek Discovery, CBS All Access on the back. And they were just sort of on the couches.
That is awesome.
And I took one. Because if you have the opportunity, you should just do it.
You should absolutely do it.
I didn't ask anyone's permission. I just took that pillow, and now I have it.
It'll be our secret.
And I love it. Well, I just told everybody, but I'm proud of this fact. So, CBS, if they're going to come after me, they're going to come after me for something more than that.
All right. Well, we won't tell anybody. We'll put the cone of silence around this part. So that's wonderful. I think it's fantastic. We got to put pictures of all of that, because I think that's wonderful. So you've got your collection. You're a cosplayer. I understand you also like to write fanfic.
Yes.
So when did you start writing fanfic?
Oh, so
for anything beyond Star Trek or not?
I would say that I'm pretty sure the first fanfic I ever wrote was about Han Solo and Princess Leia, and it was about their daughter, who was me. And it was before they had a daughter in Legends. I made up Jaina Solo before she existed, and she was me, and I was definitely going to play her in the movie. And then when Next Generation started, I started writing a ridiculous amount of fan fiction about Beverly Crusher's childhood and teenage years, where, again, she was me. And I wrote a lot of stories about Beverly Crusher as a middle schooler, and Beverly Crusher going to the academy. And then I also wrote really weird things, like there's it's The Defector, I think is the episode where...
Yeah, with Admiral Jarek.
So there's a Romulan, and I read
Played by the incredible James Sloyan, by the way.
In some magazine or something, there was a throwaway comment that it was supposed to be a romance between Beverly and the Romulan. So I was like, okay, that happened.
Oh, you shipped that.
See it on the screen. That definitely happened. And so I wrote this whole thing about her going to find his family, to give them and tell him, everything that he did and how wonderful it was and amazing. And so she had to sneak behind Romulan enemy lines. Yeah.
I will have to say, that is a ship I never in my wildest dreams would have made. Beverly Crusher and Admiral Jarek. That is awesome.
My special power is coming up with ships that no one has ever heard of or imagined.
All right, give me more.
I mean, I like to ship characters that across shows and things like that. I love to find connections. And so I don't know, I have I literally have an entire list of these. But so I'll take like minor characters like Robin Leffler and Cito Jackson, and I'll decide that they were totally a couple.
Oh, okay.
And Cito Jackson is also alive because Robin went and saved her.
Okay.
So just
got it.
In case you were wondering, that happened.
Well, no, I mean, you could make a case that, Leffler was on board the ship while Jaxa was. That could have been in the show, right? That could have been a real thing. But I think that's great. And
then time and space doesn't matter, so I will take something like Kira Nerys and Philippa Georgiou. Time travel hijinks. It worked out really well. It was amazing. They had a relationship when Kira was very young and angry. And then years later, after everything that happened in Deep Space Nine happened, again, time travel, she can go wherever she wants. And so
this is Prime Georgiou.
That's right. So she went back in time and said, thank you. You really helped me when I was a angry young woman. And then they fell in love.
Oh, that's a wonderful story. So do you publish on like Archive of Our Own or something like that?
I do, yes. So I'm terrible at ending stories. So I have a lot of started. And I've been writing fan fiction since forever. So when the internet began and I started putting it out into the world, it was mostly on like mailing lists or there were archives just for one ship. So I was hugely into Janeway Paris. And there was a place called Jupiter Station.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote so many of those stories. And they're terrible. They're this was whatever 25 years ago, right? Voyager started 25 years ago, so I was not good, and it was crazy. But I loved doing it, and I still have. They still exist in the ether. Like I had my own webpage that was about. It was called CatherineIsLonely.com, and it was.
Oh my goodness!
It was about finding someone for Catherine Janeway, who was her true love. And I shipped her with literally everyone. Like I made an entire chart where I listed everyone who'd ever been on Voyager, and I gave them a song. I explained why they would make a good couple and why they wouldn't.
You're very disciplined in this.
And so that still exists. And so it has my bad fan fiction, and and my horrible like photo manips of things. It's crazy. And at that time, I was calling myself Anika after the character from Neon Genesis Evangelion. So it was like Asika's Star Trek fan site. Yeah, I contain multitudes. But now I still write and I post new things on Archive of Our Own all the time. And I also make fan videos. And think that's what you should post. They're better.
Oh, no, I'm posting all this stuff.
And that's one of my favorite mediums, is making a little tiny music video that tells you why I like whatever it is that I'm making this particular thing for.
So what are you currently working on as far as your fanfic?
So I'm in Star Wars mode right now because the latest movie came out. So I'm currently working on 3 different Star Wars stories. But when Discovery first came out, I became hugely back into Star Trek fan fiction and wrote a lot of different things. Not even just Discovery. I got back into my Voyager feels as well because I was, in Star Trek mode. So I wrote I was Admiral Cornwell. I love her forever. I'm not over the finale. Will I ever be over the finale? Probably not.
You and me both. I'm not getting over that one either.
So I wrote a lot of Cornwell and Cornwell Lorca and Cornwell Georgiou and whoever. And I also decided that Katrina Cornwell was Jonathan Archer's granddaughter. This, again, I just decide these things and then I make an entire universe around the idea of it. So I have ridiculous headcanons about that her parents died when she was a teenager, and so she was raised by her much older grandfather. He had a farm, but he also lived, he had places all over, so she grew up in Paris and San Francisco, and I forget where I put his farm, but the Midwest, and then Andor. So
Why not?
yeah, so I write ridiculous things, and I
What's
love
your
it.
what's your favorite Star Trek fanfic you ever wrote?
Oh gosh,
Your personal favorite. Doesn't have to be the best one or the one you think that is the most accessible. I mean, but for you personally, the one you look at and you're like, man, I'm really, really proud of the work I did on that one.
I mean, I'm proud of all of them, even the terrible ones.
Okay.
So
Way to own it. I approve.
oh yeah, I am. I think that I love that I can tell how much I've improved. And I love how I've told the same story in different ways enough times for it to be interesting. And so that's fun. But one of the ones that I am very proud of is actually something that I wrote for New Year's, not this year, not last year, maybe the year before. I'm not exactly sure when.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was, but whatever. New Year's. I wrote it for New Year's, and it was whenever first season Discovery was, because again I was feeling all my Star Trek feels, and I was very excited, and I was in fandom. What was great about Discovery is that my fandom rose up, like all of the people, because one of the things that I love about fandom and why. Like Voyager was super important to me as a series, but it was also super important to me because I needed a community at that time. Like at that time in my life, I really needed other people who got me and who understood me, and Star Trek gave me that, or helped me find that. And so it was really exciting when Discovery came out and all the Star Trek nerds rose from the ashes and were like, hey, we're still here. I even found people that I knew in Voyager fandom, in Discovery fandom. So it was really exciting. And so at that high of, hey, it's all starting again, I wrote a story that spanned all of the series and connected them all together. So it had T'Pol and Archer, and then it had Archer with his granddaughter, Katrina Cornwell, and then it had she mentored Jim Kirk, and then so it was like going through, there were all these connections throughout all of the series, and in Talk About Crazy Ships, I ended up pairing off Jake Sisko in 7 of 9.
Whoa!
And so all of this in this one little fic that I wrote basically as a thank you to all of the Star Trek fanfic people that I was finding at that time. And I'm very proud of that because I was able to get little bits of every series and little bits of all the characters that I love and play around with relationships and have fun things happening. And there was a through line of, so Archer's farm, Lorca inherited it because Katrina died first, so Lorca inherited the farm and he made it into a school, the Archer School, and then Beverly Crusher heard about that, and so when Picard retired, they turned his vineyard into a school as well. And so like there's little things like that I like to have echoes throughout all of the, how it's all interconnected.
Did you ever read the book Mosaic?
Yes, the Janeway book by Jerry Taylor. Yes.
Yeah, I thought you would like that if you hadn't read it, because it has a lot of that stuff, like these sort of weird connections to other things, and all that.
Riker shows up in that. It's the best.
One of my favorite bits is Admiral Finnegan, for absolutely no reason, which I just loved in that book. So another guest made me read that one, and I thanked her for it. Alexandra suggested that one, and it was fantastic. Okay, let's talk a little bit about how you consume Star Trek. We're in the world of streaming. So when you want to watch an episode, do you pop it on a phone, or are you watching it on a big screen, or what are you doing?
So I have a television with a Roku and a Netflix. I don't have television the way I don't have an antenna. I don't have cable. I don't have any. I just have streaming.
Mm-hmm.
But I have every streaming that you can have. And it's still less expensive because I live in, again, the suburbs. So there's only like one person that you can get cable from, and you have to bundle everything. And so people are complaining CBS All Access is too much money. It is still less, even though I have Disney Plus and I have everything.
So you're watching it on a screen that you've got hooked up?
But I also have my laptop because I have a daughter and one television, so she's using it. That I'm not. She does actually watch some things with me, and she even will watch Star Trek with me sometimes. So, but usually I'm watching by myself.
So, but you're not buying the Blu-rays and the DVDs and all that stuff?
No. Sorry. I want nothing. I want no clutter.
You don't have to apologize.
I need space for my plushies.
Hey, if you've got more Spock squids, I think that's totally fine. I don't think anyone would blame you to say, I don't have DVDs because I got Spock squids and I got a Chakotay teddy bear. I think that's A-okay.
And also, again, I like to make these fan videos, and I need it to be digital for that. So that I can
right on
capture this content.
Yeah, for sure. And okay, well, I think we should start diving into some episodes. Are you game?
I'm ready.
All right. Well, I want to start with one that I think is a favorite for a lot of people. I don't know if it'd be on their top 10 or anything like that, but I think it's certainly a favorite episode, mostly because of the amazing guest star. Let's talk about Ensign Ro, TNG, Season 5, Episode 3, with the amazing Michelle Forbes, who is just delightful and amazing in everything she's ever been in, as far as I can tell, because anytime I see her, it's always been a delight. One of the things you told me about this episode is you said it's the first time you felt seen by Star Trek. What does that mean?
So the way I explain it is the Enterprise is made up of bright stars, the best and the brightest that Starfleet has to offer, both in the original series and in the Next Generation. They're the greatest. And I am not. I'm not like putting myself down. I wouldn't make it in Starfleet. And I definitely wouldn't make it on the Enterprise. Again, I'm not any version of military. I'm not a scientist. I'm a social scientist. But I'm not a hard scientist or a life scientist. I'm not an explorer, although I do want to live on a boat.
That sounds fun.
I mean, who doesn't, right? But I just never felt like I would fit in. Wesley would be the closest person that was the me, right? That was the self-insert character for me at that time would be a Wesley, and I was not Wesley. Wesley's a genius. Wesley walks into the bridge and gets a bridge position over 100 people that actually went to Starfleet Academy. So as much as I loved Star Trek, I didn't feel like I belonged in it. I felt like it was maybe aspirational, but it wasn't even really something that I would aspire to because it wasn't what I wanted necessarily. And then Rolaren came on, and she was damaged and hard and had a lot of rough edges and didn't fit in at all. And whether she was trying to, because she did sometimes, or not trying to, because she was really sort of against the idea of it, she didn't. And she knew it, and she felt like, even if I don't want to fit in, I feel like I'm failing at fitting in and at not wanting to not want to fit in. So I just really glomped onto that version of a character who had, obviously the TNG cast has lots of flaws. Like Worf is a mess. Geordi is a mess. They're wonderful and amazing, but they have all sorts of flaws. Even Picard.
Leia Brahms,
Yeah,
very
exactly.
problematic.
Oh my God. Don't even get me started on Geordi's love life. But they hide it well. They've convinced everyone that they're still the best and brightest. And Ro Laren was like, I am not even going to try to hide it. I don't have to. You're going to like me or you're not going to like me, and I don't care. And that was the attitude that I was aspiring to, just because of my personality and because of how I grew up and how I was becoming a person. I have 3 younger brothers, but I'm the oldest. I'm the only girl, and my mother died when I was 13.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was in a house full of men. And my father was actually my stepfather, who adopted me when I was very young and who I absolutely consider my father. He raised me. He is anything that you would say father, he is to me. But it was another difference between me and my brothers, between me and my father, between me and the rest of my family. I was the odd one out. I was different and strange. And it was hard for me to build an identity as a girl. And, I basically raised myself because my father, he was 16 years older than my mother. He didn't expect to have children until I showed up in his life. And then he had 4. And she was definitely the caregiver in the house. She was a nurse, so it was her thing, both professionally and personally. And then all of a sudden, he was a single dad with 4 kids, and it was like, what am I even doing with my life? And he was 50 something, and so it was rough. And then he had some mental health issues. He didn't believe in therapy. He believed in drinking. So it was, there was all these things that I was dealing with. And my armor was that attitude of Ro Laren's of, look, we're a disaster here in this house, but we're proud of it. And it was also, I was raised that way. We were bohemians is how I explain it. I'm still a bohemian now. I do not conform to conservatism in any way. And my mother was like literally a flower child hippie type from the 60s. And my father was a college professor at, again, a liberal arts university that prides itself on being nonconformist and in your face and free speech type stuff. So I was always going to be a rebel. And then I was a damaged rebel. And Ro Laren gave me someone in Star Trek, my favorite thing in the world, that looked like me and felt like me and was me on screen.
You had made reference to the fact that at the time that's what you wanted to be. So it sounded like you had a change. You decided that Ro Laren was sort of who you wanted to be, and then you had a little shift.
Well, what I'm going to say is fictional characters are always who I want to be. But it's also the reason I'm attracted to a certain fictional character. Who knows what it is? There'll be one thing that's like, oh, feels like me. This feels like a character made for me, and I get them and I understand it. And it's because she had issues with her dad and had a rough childhood and didn't really want to be in Starfleet. Who knows? Whatever. And then I'll take that and I'll see how is that similar to me, and also how am I similar to that. So I'm going to use Katrina Cornwell for this because I already talked about my fan fiction about her, and so I can say that, or Beverly Crusher, but she wasn't really one of my characters. Beverly Crusher was really what I wanted my mother. I missed my mother, And Beverly Crusher was that. And sort of Janeway too.
Of course.
But Ro and then Katrina, when I was older, had that same vibe, that same I'm not gonna fit into your box vibe. And I'll say that, and other people will be like, what are you talking about? First of all, we know nothing about Katrina Carmel. Why did you make up this entire backstory about her losing her parents and being raised by her weird grandfather? That didn't happen. That's not on screen. And it's like, okay, but that's how I feel, and that's what I went through, and no one said it wasn't that. So I'm going to put that into it. I relate to this character, and so I'm going to make this character relate to me too.
Which I think that's part of the joy of fanfic, right? Is that you take what's on screen, you merge and mix it sort of with your own ideas about a possible backstory or where something might go, and maybe something comes of it, right? That pleases you and pleases other people who read it. I think that's great.
So what Ro was for me was validation. It was permission to be someone who didn't always agree with Starfleet and wasn't the best at everything and was willing to show their anger and sorrow and not hide it the way that a Geordie might. Nothing against Geordie, just that's what. And yet she was in Starfleet. And eventually she leaves because she doesn't belong there. And that's why I'm sort of like, I don't really belong there either. And that's okay. I don't have to belong there.
So you liked sort of the arc she had going all the way through to preemptive strike at the end?
Yes, I was proud of her for admitting that wasn't her place and that she should be a fighter instead.
Yeah, it seems to me to be sort of a conceit in all of Star Trek that like everybody ends up in Starfleet or wants to be in Starfleet. I think Jake Sisko was one of the notable examples, Rolaren. I mean, but those are the ones that stand out because it's like everybody else who's either in Starfleet wants to stay in Starfleet and eventually becomes an admiral and gets a command, as far as we can tell, right? I mean, the number of people who don't is incredibly small in the show. Okay. Well, then let's talk about a different kind of episode. Let's talk about Devil in the Dark, TOS. Certainly a favorite of the show, but what I'm interested in is why this particular episode stands out to you. How does it speak to you, and what lesson did it teach you?
So I am a huge, huge fan of stories that are about taming dragons. That there's the story of the knight who fights the dragon and kills it and saves the princess, right? But what's a better story is they go fight the dragon and they decide to befriend the dragon, like How to Train Your Dragon. And I think that this all can be, how it began for me is that I saw Return of the Jedi when I was 7, and Darth Vader choosing to save his son was like this amazing moment, this transformative moment in my life where that defined the idea of love to me. It's like, oh my gosh, that's what it is. It's turning your back on your own self and sacrificing everything you've ever been and your identity and all of that for one person that is the most important person and not really caring about everything else. And so that's a story. Star Wars was a story of seeing a monster and seeing past the monster to what's actually inside, which is a sad old man who misses his family. And Devil in the Dark is such a perfect example of this idea of this creature that we're afraid of that is trying to destroy us, and so we're going to try to destroy it before it does. Discovering that the truth is none of that destruction is what either of them wants. And they're only enemies because they don't understand each other and they haven't tried to understand each other. And like in How to Train Your Dragon, they can't even speak the same language. They don't even know the right body language, like forget words, but they don't have any frame of reference. And they have to learn to communicate anyway. So I love any story that is about turning a monster into your friend. And I think it's just a beautiful representation of it. And I love everything about it. I'm so proud of Spock and Kirk for figuring it out and not wanting to kill it.
Oh, absolutely. I feel like the humans are the dragon, though, in the story.
Yeah, right. Because they come into, but we see everything from the point of view of humans. So they're the knights who have heard of the evil monster and the dragon. So definitely the miners, are they miners? Whatever they are, the guys who are...
Yeah, the miners. Mm-hmm.
They're the bad guys at the end of the day. Those guys are definitely the bad guys. But they didn't know they were the bad guys. So it's still, everybody's wrong and everybody's right. But I guess from my point of view, nobody's a dragon. Dragons are beautiful. I'm a dragon. Like that, it's like in my Twitter bio. So.
All right, good. Well, then I want to talk about some Discovery stuff. Let's do that. Or actually some more modern Trek. I don't know how I would categorize it yet. I called it Discovery, but I don't think that actually applies. I want to talk about the Children of Mars short trek, which is something you said you wanted to talk about. And the M5 concurred that this would be a good story for us to discuss. What is it about this episode in particular that stuck out to you? For me, it was much more of a music video and really a teaser for the Picard show more than anything else. But I'm curious as to your take on it.
So I mentioned that I make these fan videos, and just briefly, that's taking footage of whatever media that I'm interested in. And so I've made a lot of Star Trek ones and creating my own version and set it to a song. So I recently made one for the Sarek family, Sarek, Amanda, Spock, and Michael Burnham, using mostly footage from Discovery, but a few other series. And I set it to Meet Me on the Battlefield. And it spans their whole relationship. And so I'm trying to tell the story of these people who have lots of complicated relationships with no dialogue, set to the music, but I don't, necessarily use the lyrics or what the song is saying to tell the story. It's the visuals and the idea of the song and the feeling of the music and putting it all together and showing that there are different parts. Here's a hugging montage. I love to make hugging montages in like all of my vids. There are many clasping hands and hugging and kissing and touching montages, because that's how I see that there's these affection and there's so many of them and there's different ways and they're also the same. And so I create these, and Children of Mars is that. So I've seen a lot of statements and comments about the episode saying that it doesn't tell a story, that it's just a day in the life of these random kids that we don't know anything about them, and we have to make it up. We have to decide what it is about them. And there's no plot and there's no dialogue, and what does this song even mean, and why is it happening? And everything that people complain about is what I love about it. Because it feels like one of my videos, and because I make these videos and I watch a lot of them that are made by other people, I am well schooled in filling in the blanks around the story. And for a fan video, like my Sarek video or a Star Wars video, we know those things. We know Star Trek, we know Star Wars. And so we're bringing our own feelings about it, so we can fill in those spaces because we know them. We know who Spock is, and so we can, and his relationship with his father, and so we can fill in the blanks of what's happening between Spock and Sarek in this scene, because we know that, even if we don't show the whole thing. And Children of Mars, we don't know them at all. But this is another one of my superpowers, is filling in all of that. I give people entire backstories that are not on screen, and I love doing that. And it's an alternate universe. It's not the canon version of reality that I've created, but it's sort of, I love alternate universes because that means that everyone's valid. It's like just because it's not canon doesn't mean it's not true. It's true in some reality. And so I could tell you 100 things about Lil. She's my favorite. She's the human girl. She's the more an antagonist than the other one. Mm-hmm. And I looked at her and I said, oh, she's Draco Malfoy. Obviously. Like, that's who she is. She is a neglected child who is hiding behind a shield and armor of, I don't care about anything and I hate you all and I'm better than you. And, put antagonism and putting people down. That's how she's surviving her rough childhood that she doesn't want to be. She's lonely and she lashes out. So I saw her immediately and I was like, oh, I know exactly who you are and I know what's going on and it's this whole thing. And so I can extrapolate all of these things about this little tiny story. And I love that my version of Lil is going to be completely different from yours. And that's okay. They're both great and they're both real because it doesn't matter. It's not going to affect Star Trek Picard in any way, right? Picard doesn't care about these two kids. So it can be anything. It can be any reality and they're all amazing. And I just love that. It's freeing and it's beautiful. And
yeah, he doesn't even know who they are. Yeah.
And so I love it. And I also love that it's about middle school girls. Like, oh my gosh, I think they're amazing. I think that teen girls and tween girls have a lot to say and they're put down a lot by society, by media, by everyone. And so anything that highlights how hard it is to be a girl, even in the 24th century, because all of those emotions, those overwhelming emotions are still there, and your complete inability to understand relationships or how you're supposed to be making them, and your desperation to have them anyway. It's just, so, like, Children of Mars is amazing to me, and I love it, and it's, like, my favorite short trek by far, and
Oh, no, it was fantastic. And I'm a big Peter Gabriel fan. So just the music alone was enough to get me into that one for sure. Because I'd been to see him in concert several times. And him covering David Bowie was, I'll sign up for anything with that. So I totally get you there. It really was just a really special short track. And it goes to show you that they can do some really powerful stuff in a very short period of time, too. You don't need 20 minutes or anything like that. You can do something very powerful very quickly. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Let's talk about a very different kind of episode. Let's talk about Far Beyond the Stars, Deep Space Nine, Season 6, Episode 13. Certainly a very unusual kind of Star Trek episode, and I dare say the kind of Star Trek episode we're probably not likely to see in a more modern incarnation of Trek, where they're doing these very serialized stories. This was certainly sort of a one-off in a lot of ways, but we have going back in time to the 1950s. We have all the characters, all the actors playing different characters, living in a very different way. We get to see all of them without their makeup on, doing very different things. I'm sure they all enjoyed it very much. Tell me, what is it about this particular episode that stuck out to you? I'm going to guess that it had something to do with sort of something that ties into our discussion about fan fiction earlier, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, yes. I think that it's a very powerful episode on many levels. I just think it's really well put together as a story. But what I love is, as I said, I love alternate universes. I love thinking about what makes these characters. Like, what are the integral bits and pieces of them that create someone that is distinct from someone else? And when you go to an alternate universe, whether it's the mirror universe or a holodeck recreation or something like this, like fantasy fairy tale version of Deep Space Nine, a dark fairy tale, but it is. It's so refreshing to recognize the characters, and also recognize their differences. So I love that playing with identities and that idea of distilling a character into one thing, and what is the most important thing about Sisko? Why is he Sisko? And it's this passion, and it's this need for things to be fair and right and good and just and equal. And those are the things that we can see in Captain Sisko, and then also in this version of him that is completely separate. And the other amazing thing about this episode is that it's about us. It's about Star Trek fans. And it's saying, hey, we wouldn't have what we have. We wouldn't have Star Trek Deep Space Nine if we didn't have you. You are as important to Star Trek Deep Space Nine as all of the actors and all of the writers and all of the camera people and the music and the costumes and everything that comes together to create Star Trek Deep Space Nine. We need an audience to show it to, and we need an audience to inspire. And then the audience inspires us. And I just think that's such a beautiful message for all of us to grasp and to get to embrace the wonder that is Star Trek in this really touching story that is really powerful and has all of this racism and sexism, anti-Semitism, and all of the everything in it. And is also
all the isms.
Yeah, and it's also just a story about telling a story. And how powerful it is to tell a story, and how powerful it is to hear a story. It's just magic. It's probably my favorite Star Trek episode of every Star Trek. Because it can stand alone, and it can tell that story. It can tell the story of stories, and how storytelling is transformative.
Absolutely. It's certainly one of my favorites. Whenever people want to talk about The Visitor as like the best of Deep Space Nine, I always think, no, this one is way better. I put this one way up there at the top. And I'm not that big of a Deep Space Nine fan, but this one is one that I think really just transcended the show in so many ways. I
would say that I like Deep Space Nine, but Next Generation and Voyager are more my comfort food, and they're more my Star Trek. But this is still my favorite episode because it's so powerful and it's so beautiful. And also, I couldn't leave this discussion without saying that the costuming is so amazing in this episode. Like, not only is it just period ready, but what they say about the characters and the story through the costuming and the production design, like everything that's on the wall, it's all connected, and it's just amazing. And you can watch it over and over again and pick out different things to pay attention to, and like the music and like everything is involved in telling that story and in creating that story, and it's just really, really amazing. I love costuming. That's one of the things that I really love to look at in Star Trek and in all stories. I create outfits for how I feel, and I love to see how the costumes are assisting the story, and this is a A+ episode for it.
Oh, without a doubt. And it's a great thing about sci-fi too, is that you can sort of put people in these situations and separate out sort of the modern feelings about things, and just have a very different perspective on things. I remembered when I was a young kid, and I remembered going to the school library, and I took out a book of sci-fi classics, and there was a particular story that I remembered reading, and I don't think this was actually a classic, but it was in the book anyway, and they had just radically different senses about what people should wear and what was appropriate to show. and certain things that were not normal in that society, and it was very different from our society. And I just, as like a kid, like I think I might have been 12 or 13, it just was mind-blowing. It's like, wow, this is incredible stuff. It was really wild. So I totally appreciate that. So let's move on. And since you made reference to Voyager, I think we should talk about a Voyager episode. Let's talk about Year of Hell. That's season 4, episodes 8 or 9, or as I like to call it, Year of Heck, my Voyager watch through, which I am tweeting live as I go through it on Twitter. I'm always making reference to the various episodes, and even episodes I love, I like to give a little snark to, and it's a brotherly sort of thing. I love it.
Same.
So you like to give snark too?
Oh,
I always appreciate some good snark.
I have a whole. I don't know if you know about my photo caps.
Oh no, I've seen them.
Yeah, so that's all snark. 90% snark.
Tell me about Year of Hell and why this episode jumped out at you. Is it just a great piece of sci-fi, or was it something about the characters that you particularly identified with? What's going on?
So, Voyager is my Star Trek. And I love that it is about misfits. And again, like people who wouldn't make it on the Enterprise, the entire crew.
There's a bunch of Voyager fans right now who are like firing up Twitter right now, and they're going to be blasting you. But go ahead.
I have the receipts. But everybody is damaged. Like, everybody is Rolaren. The Janeways in the 2 box don't have it all together all the time, and we see that. And we see that in public, not just hidden in their own lives or in private. We see it displayed on the bridge sometimes. And so I love that. It just feels very raw to me. All of Voyager, even the silly episodes. And Year of Hell is like literally, I mean, it's in the title. It's trauma writ large. They lose literally everything. They have to abandon ship and go down to a skeleton crew. Janeway blows up everything. And each timeline is actually destroyed over and over and over again. So it's about impermanence, and yet at the same time, it's about these vital, integral connections that they have to each other. Like the Tuvok and Janeway hug when she's staying on the ship and everyone else is leaving is so beautiful, and it's so long, and it's just 2 people who have known each other for so long and who are so close to each other and who are so important to each other. They're family in every sense of the word. And they have to separate, knowing that at least one of them is going to be gone, be blown up. And that the way that the episode allows us to really live in that moment, and really the entire 90 minutes of Year of Hell is that moment over and over and over again. It's just everything horrible is happening to us, and we just have to keep going anyway. Just keep swimming like Dory. So it represents Janeway in a very real way to me, because Janeway to me is that never give up, never surrender person. Like, that is her.
Ooh, is that a Galaxy Quest reference?
That was a Galaxy Quest reference.
Because that's the best Star Trek film ever made.
And it's just like everybody is at their worst and their best at the same time. And I love that. I love the idea of trying, because what's so impressive about this episode is that as much as the Voyager crew and Janeway herself are trying desperately to keep hanging on and to keep going and to keep their sights on, we're going to get home no matter what happens to us, even if everything bad happens to us, somehow we're gonna fix it, and we're gonna get home anyway. We're gonna get all of our crew back, and we're gonna fix our shit, and we're gonna get out of here, and we're gonna get home. Like, she really believes that, and she keeps going towards it. And at the same time, we have the antagonist who is doing the same thing. Like, all he wants is to get home with his family and to have it be restored. And so both protagonists and antagonists have the same goal, and it's showing how impossible it is and how wrong it is and how right it is at the same time. And that's just so clever. And it's taking the biggest strength of Voyager, which is this can-do attitude in the middle of, we don't even know where we are, we've never seen this place before, and creating a family in order to get through it and survive together. It's that survival Voyager, and creating a villain out of it. So it's really amazing to me. I think that episode, I can watch it over and over and over again, and it's like, it's as ridiculous as it sounds to say that this horribly traumatic episode that is literally about everything bad that could possibly happens makes me feel better about life. If I'm feeling sad about the state of the world, I can watch Year of Hell and be like, all right, we got this. It's going to be okay. Because no matter what happens... It's
not quite like that.
Well, it's just this... You can be your best version of yourself in the worst version of the universe.
Let's talk about, we've been talking about Admiral Cornwell, so let's talk about The War Without, The War Within from Star Trek Discovery. Your comment to me was, my Admiral's best episode. So I'm going to need to see the receipts on that one, friend. So let's have it. Tell me, what about this episode attracted you to it?
So, I mean, first of all, we have to say that I love Katrina Cornwell so much. And so I was super excited for her to come back, because there's that in the earlier episode when she shares the scream with L'Rell. Like, I loved her from the instant she was on screen. I was like, oh, I love her. But when that scream happened, I was like, it was another transformative moment for me. It was like, I feel, like, I can't even describe how amazing it was to watch. And it was exactly what I needed. I said that Ro Laren was what I needed when I was a teenager watching Next Generation, and Katrina Cornwell was what I needed when I'm a middle-aged woman. It was like, I needed that. So it was great. And this episode, she's there all the time. She's got so much to do. She gets to be an action hero. She gets to have amazing scenes where she's emoting off of different people. She has another great scene with L'Rell in prison where she's so subdued, and L'Rell is so also subdued. She's so lost, and I don't know, there's just so much in that. But it's the scene where they come on Starbase 1? Starbase 1. Yeah, when they come on Starbase 1 and it's been destroyed. And she freezes and cannot react and is just absolutely devastated by what has happened and all of those lives lost, and how can we recover from this? Because you have to remember that, okay, so at this point, Discovery escaped the mirror universe in the end of last episode, and so
right, and they had a time jump.
Supposed to be their happy ever after, right? They got home. It's their end game of Voyager, right? Like, yay, we're here, guys, we made it back. But it's like everything is worse than when they left, and it's been 9 months. So the Federation has been at war for those 9 months, and they're losing. And the Klingons are crazy. They can't figure out, because the Klingons are also sort of losing because they're all different factions. And so it's just chaos and war and drama, and everything is horrible. And Discovery has to deal with that because they want to celebrate, and they can't even have 2 seconds to celebrate, which is also like the entire story of Discovery, let's just say. It's just never ending bad things are happening. So, but it's that moment on the bridge that makes it her best episode, and makes it, from an acting standpoint and from a learning about this character standpoint, I just love that she loses, this is another where we see her damage and it's in front of everyone, and she's the highest ranking officer, she's the person in charge, she's the face of Starfleet, and she's devastated and lost and can't go on. And so what does that say about the rest of us? And it's just a split second, and she recovers and she comes back strong and she figures out the problem and she comes up with a pretty terrible solution, but she comes up with a solution. And it's that moment where she has to deal with her own emotions and can't, that is so powerful to me.
So how did you feel about the Cornwell arc overall, sort of where she begins? She meets up with Mirror Lorca. She doesn't know it's Mirror Lorca. Then we have the L'Rell situation, which is certainly a high point. And then, of course, she has an ignominious demise at the end. Did you want more of her? Did you think it was just right? Tell me what you think about the overall Cornwell story.
I definitely want more of her. Again, I have not recovered from the end. And my main issue, I have a lot of issues with her death specifically, and the end of Discovery in toto. But I hate her death, not just because she's dead, but because it's wrong for her character. It doesn't make sense for her narrative. It ruins her narrative. Because her narrative up until that point was that she was a survivor. That whatever you throw at her, she's going to get out of it. And Pike's narrative up to that point was that he was a sacrificer, that he is willing to sacrifice everything, including himself, to fix the problem. And in that moment where she sacrifices herself for his survival, they switch, and they didn't sell that to me enough. It was too sudden. There's a universe where it makes sense because of their switching, because they learn something from each other, and then they do this. But we didn't get that scene. We didn't get the I'm explaining what's happening and why we're switching. That scene didn't happen. It was just the plot needed her to die and him to survive, and so that's what happened. And I don't like when narratives don't make sense. That's not true. I like when narratives don't make sense because they're too true, but I don't like when narratives don't make sense because they're not true to themselves.
So that's what I think you were going for there, if I understood it right, was that it felt like it just wasn't a true moment for the character.
Right. Yes. It betrays. It's a betrayal of her character because that's not who she is. She's not the person to stand in front of a torpedo. She's the person to hit the button and dive under the door and have her arm chopped off. Like, that's who she is.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm sad because I love Jane Brooke and I was hoping to see more of her, and so I'm kind of sad we're not going to get to see more.
I'm really not over it. I'm not over it. I was sad and angry for a long time, and I'm not excited for Star Trek Discovery Season 3. I hope that I eventually will get there. Because I love a lot of the other characters. And it has nothing to do with Season 2. So there's maybe it's a reset and I'll get excited. But a lot of the things that I love, there's no Cornwell, there's no L'Rell, there's no Sarek. We're leaving a lot behind. But yet, as my friend Alex Perry says, it's a golden age of Star Trek, right? Because we have all this other Star Trek coming. So I don't need it. But I liked a lot of Discovery, and I don't want to be mad at it.
I gotcha. Well, then let's talk about something a little more fun. Let's talk about, well, I don't know, but that might be that might not be fun. So I don't know. Let's find out. Tell me about Lower Decks TNG. This is a season 7 episode. Season 7 gets often maligned, but I think this is a really great episode myself. Season 7, episode 15. Here we've got Jaxo, we've got the Vulcan ensign, sort of hapless Vulcan ensign. We've got all of our lower decks characters sort of wondering what the powers that be are sort of doing. What is it about this episode that appealed to you?
So it is a fun episode in that we get these secondary characters and we get to see these people who are not the best and brightest, but they're still in the Enterprise, so they're sub-best and brightest. And I love that they all sort of line up to another character. Like, I love that so much. They're like little legacy versions, and there's like Mini Riker and Mini Guinan, and that's so fun. I think it's great. And so as a whole, I think the episode is fun, even though it has a sad ending. But what I love about it is Cedo Jackson. She's not fun. She's pretty sad. She's another Bajoran.
Absolutely.
Every Bajoran is sad. Let's just start with that. And she had to go through this whole traumatic event that we saw in the first duty. So I love that this is a sequel, because TNG didn't do a lot of sequels. Mm-hmm. And the first duty really messed Wesley up. And so you can imagine that it really messed all of them up. You can extrapolate. If I was in that situation, I would be pretty destroyed by the whole thing. Even just having to take that year over again with everyone knowing why. Wesley left. Like, he couldn't even take it. So Cedo Jackson is really strong because she went through that, but it must have been so incredibly lonely. And she must have had so much guilt and shame that she had to work through. And she still got here. She still got onto the Enterprise. And she is another, she's a fighter. I like these characters who don't let their trauma define them, but do acknowledge that it exists and don't hide it. They don't hide it, and they also don't let it only be the only thing that is seen. And I think it's such an amazing story for her that she's taking on this mission. She's taking on this mission because she thinks she needs to be redeemed. She needs to do something to make up for the mistakes that she's made. But she's also just taking it on because it's the right thing to do. And those two things can exist simultaneously and both be powerful. And we don't see her die on screen, so I'm just going to continue believing that she's not dead and be happy in that reality, because I don't want her story to be over either. But at least her story if it was a sacrifice and if it was a death, it's a good one, and it's appropriate to who she is and who she's become. It's just super sad because she's so young and she had so much more to offer. And she was just coming into her real identity.
You talked about the fact that she doesn't hide sort of the damage that she has and the sadness that she has, but I would compare that against another character that we've talked about briefly, and I feel like we should get into that, which is B'Elanna Torres, who I think is very good at hiding a lot of the problems that she has. In fact, there's a whole episode devoted to it. In fact, there's something you call your B'Elanna trilogy, which I think is illustrative of this. We have Faces, Extreme Risk, and Lineage, which tells sort of the B'Elanna story here. And in Extreme Risk, I think that's the perfect example, the counterexample, actually, to what you're just talking about, right? She's doing all this risky stuff. She's hiding it. She doesn't want to talk about it. She's not going to EMH Troy or whatever that they have on the Voyager to sort of get sorted out. And it's really dangerous, not only for her, but for her crewmates, right? If she's not at her best self, she's got a key job, but she's got to keep things running right. And if she's not up to it, people got to know. And I think she actually ends up putting herself at risk in a lot of ways, in ways that are not productive. But I'm curious as to your particular take on the B'Elanna character. So tell me, in this counterexample of Lower Decks, what's the Cedo character in particular? What is it about B'Elanna that really jumped out at you?
First, to answer the Extreme Risk, and what's so great about Extreme Risk is that, exactly, she's hiding and she's not doing it, and that's the wrong answer. Like, that's not what she should be doing. That's a bad idea. And so it's B'Elanna being very B'Elanna, because you're absolutely right. B'Elanna's whole self is this fight between, I have to be a persona, I have to present myself in a certain way that people are going to accept me, and no, I don't want, they're just going to have to accept me for who I am, and I shouldn't ever have to pretend. That's her fight, and we see it in Faces. And so the reason I call this the B'Elanna trilogy, I think that B'Elanna, through the course of Voyager, has the clearest and best character arc, certainly in Voyager, and potentially in all of Star Trek. And I think it's easier for her because she's a supporting character, so she doesn't have as much stuff that happens to her, right? Like, she's not a Picard. Picard, everything is thrown at him, and so it's harder for him to have a clear, consistent... Picard might be not as good as an example as Janeway. Janeway does not have a clear, consistent arc. Janeway's arc is like crazy pants. But B'Elanna, every time we get an episode focused on B'Elanna, it makes sense to B'Elanna. She is very true to herself throughout the series, and we see her growing and becoming so much more than what she started. But at the same time, she's not healed. She's not like this whole new, better person. She hasn't become something that is now a butterfly.
Right. It's painful.
Yeah, it's very painful. So in Lineage, which is a 7th season episode, B'Elanna is struggling with the same issues and ideas of abandonment and anxiety that she was struggling with in Faces, which is a 1st season episode. But it's not because she stayed the same. She's grown a lot, and she has so much more support, and she has so much more confidence in herself, and she knows who she is and where she belongs. But at the same time, she's still dealing with... She's still in her own skin. She can't escape herself. No matter how hard she tries, she's still B'Elanna. And that's so powerful because that's real. That's what life is. Life isn't a beginning, a middle, and an end. Life is everything over and over again all the time. It's always beginning, it's always ending, and you're always in the middle.
And we always grow in fits and starts too, right? It's never like a pure linear approach, right? Is that you advance some and you take a couple steps back.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it was a good example of that.
So I think that B'Elanna is very, it's this really beautiful progression that, again, sometimes I don't even know if it's intentional. Like, I don't know if the writers sat down and thought. Like, sometimes I think they did, because it's really interesting how the 3rd episode of every season is a B'Elanna episode. So it's like, they're telling a story, and they're telling a story about B'Elanna.
I had never noticed that.
Interesting. But at the same time, Voyager and all of television, like, it's not just Voyager, it's not just Star Trek, but all of television it's such a messy medium. It's never a through line. Even now, when people are trying so hard to create a 10-episode movie season of everything and to know exactly where everything is going, like, they still don't. There's still going to be something that happens in between season 1 and season 2 that is unexpected, or that changes things, or they come up with an idea that changes the story. And that's just the way television is. So it is both done with intent and done just because they knew the character well enough to write her in this way, and Roxanne Dawson understood what she was projecting, so that even in episodes that aren't about B'Elanna, we can like see her behind and get something of that character. So I just think if you watch just B'Elanna throughout Voyager, it's telling a really amazing story that is all of Voyager in one character.
Well, I'd agree with you. And I think one of the things that makes Voyager so wonderful is that it started so strong because the show started with the characters being defined. And I think if you jump back and look at TNG or TOS even, when they were in those early episodes, they didn't know sort of how Picard was going to be. He was kind of cranky, I think, in a lot of early season 1 TNG. And you have the Data character who had a lot of changes. He's not the same character that he became just a season later. And that's not because of the arc. It's just that they kind of settled into how the character was going to be, just from a ground zero perspective. Whereas Voyager, I think they were very strong in knowing who those characters were right from the beginning. And it gave them something to build on, and I think that it made the character so much better. One of the characters I compare her to, and I'll be curious to see your take on it, is Crusher in TNG, the Doctor. Is that a lot of people shipped Crusher and Picard. A lot of people still want to see what Crusher's up to in the new Star Trek Picard show. And I always felt that Crusher never really had much to do in the show as far as an arc. She had some things to do as far as being a doctor, and she did them very well and all that. And she had a couple of episodes here and there, but I think that character ended up pretty much the same place she started. I don't think there was a lot of growth there. And so when I look at Picard, I think here's a guy who's, changed his whole mentality about a lot of things. And so I never really saw them two together, and I'm sort of befuddled by the whole ship of it. I don't really get it. I'm not opposed to it. I just don't understand it. But when I compare that to like a character like B'Elanna, it's like she's so exciting to me because she really grew, and it made the character go to a whole new level, and I really appreciated it and loved the character in so many wonderful ways. I wanted wonderful things for her by the end of the show. Whereas I never really felt that way about Crusher. And that's not a critique, by the way, of anything with Gates, who I thought was wonderful. It's just that she just wasn't given all that much to do in the show. But I'm certainly open to being disabused of these notions. So sort me out here.
I completely agree with you and it's not just Crusher. I mean, I can also say that maybe the reason that Rolaren was so strong for me is because Crusher and Deanna, certainly, and also like Geordi and even Worf didn't really get any actual character growth until he was on a different series. They were very, I am the engineer and I like hanging out with my friends and I like hot chocolate and this is what you know about me. They weren't very rich characters. They were very like a paper doll version of a character. And Data and Picard and kind of Riker like eventually got more going with them. Deanna was starting to get more going with her, and she actually got more growth afterwards in like other series and in the movies. Crusher to this day has not gotten that treatment. We know nothing about her. And it's sad because I love her. She's very caring, she's fun, she's a theater person.
Mm-hmm.
I do ship her with Picard because they have chemistry and because the only things we ever know about her are she has a kid and she has a relationship with Picard. So, like, that's what I'm going to respond to because that's the only thing I'm ever given.
Gotcha.
And because I'm me and I can give you an entire life story of someone off screen, I can decide who she is and what she cares about on the little breadcrumbs of things. Like, her childhood is crazy. Her child is weird. Like, something terrible happened. I don't know exactly at what age, but she definitely lost her parents and she was raised by her grandmother, and then like another disaster happened and she survived that with her grandmother. And it's like, why don't we ever get to know any of these things? Because that's very rich. And at the same time, she was a single mother. I'm a single mother. Like, I can relate to these things. And we never, Picard, we see Picard parenting Wesley more than we see Beverly. We see Riker parenting Wesley more than we see Beverly doing it. Like, we never actually get to see her parenting her son, even though that's like one of the three things we know about her. And it's the films barely remember that she exists as a character. Like, she does nothing in any of the films, and it's a travesty. It's really upsetting to me, because in the finale, you know, we get to see her captaining her own ship, and then that reality is erased, and we're giving nothing in its place. So the reason I would want to see her in Picard is because I want to know what she's doing, and I want to know who she is. And I don't need her to be in a relationship with Picard, but they were friends. They were like the closest friend. She was his closest friend on that ship. So where is she? And they're making up, and I love that they're making up characters for Picard. I love that. I want more new characters instead of the same characters. I don't want TNG. I want Picard, Star Trek Picard, with other people. But they had a doctor come in this episode. There was a doctor who came and like gave him a physical. And it's like, why is this not Beverly? And then he goes to see his old friend to help him out, and she hates him and is living in her beach house or whatever. And it's like, why isn't this Beverly? Like, there's all these places where it could be Beverly, but it's not, and they don't explain why. So,
well, I'll give you one little piece of info on that, which is it's in the Countdown comics that they came out with, which were semi-canonical as we record this. So that's actually the Raffi character, the woman who's living at the Vasquez Rocks, sort of in that trailer out there. She was Picard's first officer on another ship, on the USS Verity, which is the ship that he was on trying to do the Romulan rescue. Right. So she was the first officer. He was commanding the ship as an admiral, and that's how he knows her. And they had adventures together that are told in the comics. So I can share that piece of information for you. It's not particularly spoilery, I don't think.
I'm super excited for Michelle Hurd to be in Star Trek. Like, it's very exciting, and I already love her character. Like, I'm ready to love her and to be into their relationship. I'm ready to be excited for their relationship. And it doesn't take away from Beverly. It's not like you can have more than one friend. It's okay. but it's just an absence. Why? And the thing is that it's always been that way. It's always been, there is this character and we don't really care about telling you anything about her. And that's upsetting.
I would, in my own head, I would justify it, I guess, by a couple things. One, which is something I've talked about on the show before, which is I'm always really sensitive to the small universe syndrome, which is, we run into a ship and it's like, of course, it's the only other ship, Like, for instance, I see people saying online in some of the forums that I'm in, well, are we going to get to see Dax? Because Dax is still around. I'm like, well, there's only one symbiont in the whole universe, and it's the Dax symbiont, right? So, of course, if we run into a Trill that has a symbiont, it must be Dax, because that's the only one as far as I can tell, right? And so it's something that kind of drives me a little nutty. And that's my own self. It's just my own personal bugaboo. But the other thing, too, is that I think it's true to the character in that if you think about your own life, and I don't know, we don't know each other, but I would imagine, are you surrounded by the same people today that you were surrounded by 20 years ago? You live down the street from where you grew up. I certainly don't, and I have very different people around me from where I was 20 years ago. So I guess part of that is part of life, I guess. So it doesn't bug me too much. But I would love to get some wrap up in some way for some of these other characters. But I can see why they didn't do it. I'm okay with it, I guess.
I want new characters, and I don't want it to be the TNG show. It's just, it seems like now they have like mentioned everyone else, because they said Worf, Geordi, and Riker in this episode. So it's like they're going out of their way to not talk about her.
Oh, right.
That seems targeted. And because I just lost Cornwell, and she was a role model, quote unquote, for me, because she was a woman older than me that I can look up to, even though I'm older. And so it feels like it's telling me, 40-year-old Anika, you don't matter. Yeah, 80-year-old Picard matters, but 60, I don't know how old she is, old Beverly Crusher doesn't. Like, that's how it feels to me personally as
I understand.
a woman on right after the Cornwell thing. And like, I wrote a whole thing for Women at Warp about how amazing it was to have Cornwell as an age-appropriate woman in command. And we get two of them in this second episode of Picard. And so it's not like they don't exist. And so it's Star Trek is giving me back people to fill those places. And so it's going to be okay. And as far as the small universe, like, on one hand, I agree with you, but on the other hand, television is heightened reality. And so it both should make sense and it shouldn't make sense. Like, it's weird. I'm very weird about stories where I get upset when things are too pat. There's plot A and plot B and plot C, and everything at the end of the hour, everything's done. And Extreme Risk is a good example of this, where it's because, the next episode that happens, they don't talk about it at all. They literally never bring it up again in the entire series. They hint at it with things like Lineage, and that's what's so amazing about B'Elanna, and that's why Voyager lives in this weird liminal space where it's like serialized and episodic. But it's still this, it's too happy. It's too like, oh, it only took 44 minutes to solve your depression. Yay! And it's just because, not that she's not all better at the end of the episode, but she is all better by the next week. And so I don't want that. I don't want these. I want to see the consequences. I want to see Sito Jaxa living with her shame a year later. Like, that's great. I want to see Picard still dealing with all these various traumas that he's gone to. But at the same time, it is a small universe because it's not real. It's not. These are the characters that we're following, and so we're only following these lives, and so we're only going to see their connections. And if they had a connection 20 years ago, I'm very close with my college roommate. We spend every New Year's together.
That's wonderful.
So there is this, and yeah, I live in my hometown, and I've finally reached the age where people stop telling me they knew my parents. And I work where my father worked, so it's not like it can avoid it. But it was always there, and it shaped me. Like, there's literally plaques to my parents in this town. Plaques that say, in memoriam, great person, the great man Picard, the great man DeBoer. They're there. They're a part of my reality, and it doesn't feel small because it's like, yeah, that's the way it is. Which is completely my point of view. And I'm like, you are completely valid in your reality. I'm just valid in mine. That's all.
Oh, I am told that's the whole point of the show is that I give you these things to respond to, and you say how you interpret it, and I think that's totally okay. That's fine. That's what the show is, and that's why I have guests on that especially have different points of view from me. That's the most important thing, because if it's people that are too much like me, it's not going to be a good show. So that's what I want. And so I feel like we have to talk about a character that I detect is very special to you. And this, of course, is the magnificent and wonderful Seven of Nine. And in particular, we want to talk about the episode Dark Frontier. That's season 5, episode 15 of Voyager, where we learn a little bit about her backstory, which, as we've discovered here, is something that's very important to you, is understanding where these characters have been and sort of what happened to them. And so here also, if I'm not mistaken, I'm going on memory here. You might know this better than me. This is the episode where we actually learn her name for the first time. Is that right?
I think they say her name in The Gift. Like they say Anika Hansen, I believe. Oh,
that's right. You're right. They do give her name earlier. Right.
But this is the first time that it's really used in context
Right.
her
As opposed to
name.
like as a historical thing versus
Right.
someone's going to talk to her that way. Okay, that's what I was thinking of. Okay, so what is it in particular about this episode and about the Seven character that really attracts you to it? That you felt it was so important that we should talk about? And you can attack that in either way, whether you want to talk about Seven first or the episode.
So I have hinted at the fact that I went through a lot of stuff as a kid, as a teen. Who doesn't really? Like, I honestly believe that everybody just sort of survives their childhood and then goes on with their life, and that's how they're created, by going through the fire and they come out of it however they come out of it. But I went through a lot of losses. By the time I was 21, I was the oldest person in my entire family. And that's a lot. That's young to be that. And I was still in college. I had a baby. And there was a lot going on when Voyager was happening. So I had this weird relationship with the Borg, even before we got to Seven, was that I really thought it was kind of a great idea to be a Borg. I was like, you know what? If I could give up all of my overwhelming emotions and indecision and my inability to decide who I want to be or what I want with my life and all of my problems and just have confidence and security and purpose. They know what they want and they know what they're doing and they're going to go and do it. Like, that sounded great to me. I wanted to be assimilated.
Now that's something that I don't think I've ever heard before, is I want to be assimilated. So that's very interesting. Yeah.
It's just, it was great. I did not see them as scary or creepy or terrifying. I saw them as comforting. I saw them as calming. It was like, oh wow, that sounds great. Sign me up. I wouldn't have to be me anymore. I'm tired of being me. I want to be something else. And the idea of having purpose and waking up and knowing exactly what you wanted to do that day and what you were going to do, and then going out and doing it sounded great. And so 7 of 9 is so amazing because she doesn't fear and hate the Borg the way that the humans do, the way that Picard does, the way that Janeway does. She understands the quote-unquote good side. She understands that feeling of wanting to be confident and to have purpose and to know what you want and to do it. She had that, and she doesn't think it was wrong. She has to learn how to be human again, and she helped me learn how to be human again because she wasn't afraid of either the Borg or being human. She understood that there was a pathway to being 7, and that it wasn't Borg and it wasn't human. It was just herself. It was just 7 of 9. I'm going to be me, and I'm going to learn how to be me, and I'm not going to let either of these sides tell me how to be. So it was a map. It was a map for me, and I loved her so much, and I was in such a horrible place. I was literally losing my mind when Voyager was ending. She comes in season 4, and those last seasons, those last 4 seasons of Voyager were like the low point of my life. The absolute worst. I didn't know what was going on with myself. I didn't have, I talked about earlier about having structure. I didn't have school anymore. I was the kind of student who did extra homework because I loved school. I loved the idea of, I have this thing that I'm going to learn, everything there is to learn about it, and then I'm going to tell you. And I'm going to tell you how it relates personally to me, because everything was always about me, and everything still is all about me. So I didn't have that anymore. I had to get a job. I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know, I was a theater major. So I didn't have like this plan. My father was the theater professor, and he was supposed to tell me what I was supposed to do, but he died. And so I didn't have any parents. I didn't have grandparents. I didn't have aunts and uncles. And I didn't even have, after my mother died, I had, like I mentioned in my church group, church wasn't about religion to me. It was about community. It was like those people were my parents when I needed parents, because they taught me how to drive. They got me my first cell phone. They helped me write my college essays, like random people in the church. It was just a big village of people who were helping raise me. And I didn't have that anymore. Like, because I was an adult and I was supposed to be adulting, and I didn't know how. I didn't know how to balance a checkbook. I didn't know how to do anything. I barely knew how to cook. And I had a baby, so I didn't know how to do that either, because I lost my mother when I was 13, and so I had no memories of her taking care of me as a child.
And were you still looking after your brothers at this point too?
Yes, right. And my youngest brother, the one who came with me to the Star Trek convention, after college, I moved back home so that they could live with me. Like, we all bought a house together so that he could finish high school in the same place. And then when he went to college is when it then I had nothing that was holding me together. And so I have not seen Endgame because I had a mental breakdown and I stayed up for about 48 hours before whatever, the Wednesday, the Endgame premiered. And I fell asleep after Miral and Janeway are in the caves, which is also the only scene I remember. Stuff happened before that scene, but literally the only thing I remember of Endgame is Miral, Paris, and Janeway, Admiral Janeway, in a cave. And they're talking about something terrible that Janeway's going to do that she's not supposed to do. And I fell asleep, and I didn't wake up for like another 48 hours. And I have never gone back to watch. I'm currently rewatching Voyager, doing my photocapping, and I will eventually get to Endgame, and it will be the first time that I've actually seen the episode. And I've decided, like, I've considered, I'm like, maybe I should just watch it now so it won't be like a big thing. But I can't, I physically cannot watch that episode because it brings up all this stuff to me. And so, long story short, I ended up hospitalized briefly and then in an outpatient program for about 6 weeks. And then I got my life back on track, and I am much better.
I'm glad for that.
Thank you. And I know who I am, and I'm back to being that bold child that I talked about at the beginning of our conversation, that will walk up and say, hey, I think we should do this. And I lost her for a long time. And my baby is a full-blown adult in grad school, doing great. She's way better adulting than I am, even now. But completely by accident. I don't know how I have such an amazing child. And my actual baby, my younger daughter, is just started high school, and she's also super amazing and so much like me, because she deals with all this stuff too, and she would probably want to be a Borg because she'll have a temper tantrum and then be like, why am I like this? And it's like, yeah, I feel you, I understand, and it's just us and our 4 cats, and I'm proud of us though. So
when did you decide to change your name to Anika?
After I graduated college, And so I had a sort of a love-hate relationship with my name, my first name, Tamara, for my whole life, really. I was Tammy when I was little, and that was great. It was perfect. It was exactly what I wanted to be when I was little. Cute Tammy. But then when I got older, I wanted to be seen as adults, and I wanted to be seen as smart, and Tammys just aren't. Tammys are happy all the time and are bubbly and are not very smart, and I didn't feel connected to it anymore. And so I was like, well, I actually have a full name, so I'll just go by that, Tamara. But no one could pronounce it correctly, and I had weird associations with it because I didn't know. I had this weird obsession with not knowing why I was named Tamara, because it wasn't anybody's name, and I didn't have anybody to ask because they were all gone. So it was like, what? It had this just, I had a lot of like pent up weird emotions about the name. And I realized that if you just start introducing yourself as something else, people will just call you that. And so after I graduated and I was going out into the world to meet a whole bunch of new people who didn't know me, I chose Anika. And I just said it. I just said, hey, that's my name. And I misspelled it because I was literally trying to be 7. I chose Anika from Anika Hansen. But because of Anakin Skywalker, my favorite fictional character of all fictional characters, I assumed it only had one N. And so I got a bracelet engraved, Anika, and then I couldn't change it because I got a bracelet engraved. So when I found out that she spelled it with 2 N's. But I think that that's a happy accident because it means that it's my name. So even though it came from 7 and is a tribute to 7 and I am named after 7 and kind of Anakin Skywalker, it's just me. And it's really kind of great that way. And it's another, like, people still can't pronounce it the same ways that they couldn't pronounce Tamara, but even the mispronunciations are beautiful. Whereas Tamara,
I think that's a beautiful story and a beautiful tribute to how you chose to bring that fandom into your life in a really powerful way. I mean, naming yourself after some characters that mean a lot to you, I can't think of anything that's more special.
Yeah, and it's now, after my divorce, I had it legally changed. So it's now my actual name on my driver's
Good for you. I'm going to go a little bit sideways for a second, but I think that there's something here we might want to talk about for just a second, which is I was doing some work actually for my day job, and I was reading some psychological papers on something called jam studies. And it had to do with this business professor who was, or she might have been in marketing, I think, I forget, but it was a business school type thing. And what she had done is she'd set up a tasting stand. So, you know, when you go to the big box stores on the weekend and they have the people who are offering like samples of the crackers, you know, and they're selling the different flavors. She had artisanal jam. And she had 2 flavors, right? And I forget the exact specifics of it, but she had like strawberry and blueberry jam. And she was selling these jams. And she was pretending to be a person who made these jams. But it was a business study. And she did multiple appearances of selling jams in various different stores. And she sold X amount of jam, right? Blueberry and strawberry added together. And then what she did was she did a second iteration of the experiment, except this time she had 10 jams. So there was blueberry, strawberry, boysenberry, blackberry, you know, raspberry, all that stuff. She sold a lot less jam. And this was replicated multiple times. And the deeper story that I took from this was that people have decision exhaustion. And if someone gives you 2 choices, right? Do you want the blueberry or the strawberry? You can put your head in that and you can make a choice. Whereas there's so many choices that sometimes it's just befuddling and we opt out. And we saw the evidence of that in the study because people didn't buy the jam, which was good quality stuff. And it's a little story about, you know, an interesting business case, but I think there's a deeper truth here. which goes to what you were talking about, that, you're in college and sort of, when you're a kid and growing up, you have sort of all these paths laid out for you, right? You go to grammar school, you go to middle school, you go to high school, you go to college, or you go to job training, or you get a job, and then you have a job, and then that's it, right? What happens next? I don't know. Look for a mate, I guess. Have a couple kids, or sell everything and go live on the road in an RV. I mean, who knows, right? But we get sort of paralyzed by the choices in life. And I think that there's something in Voyager about that with the B'Elanna character in particular, that like she ended up in this spot that she didn't choose. And at one point she might have had all these choices, but then that was all taken away. It's like, you're the engineer on the ship and you're going to be stuck there. And that's it. And I think that she had a reaction to that. And I think that in your story, I think there's also an example of that, right? That you had all these choices in front of you now. And you had made a mention earlier that you don't understand about the military, but I will tell you that these jam studies, that is the exact same situation, that people want to have a purpose. And I'm a veteran. I knew guys like that. And I say guys deliberately because it was all guys when I was in. And there were guys who were like, nope, I'm very happy here. I know where to go, what to do, what to put on every day, how to put it on, how to dress. They tell me where to go, when to be, how to be, what to say. And it's sort of like being assimilated by the Borg. And some people find that appealing. And I'm not saying that you should have gone and joined the military. I'm not saying that. But I understand that the structure is appealing to people. And I think I see that in the story that you're telling about wanting to be assimilated, is that sometimes that can be a very powerful draw. And I think that's one of the elements of pathos, I think, of the Seven character, is that she had that and then loses it.
Right. And she has to, as an adult, she has to go back and figure out how to grow up and how to do everything that she should have learned or someone should have taught her, and in a new way, because the Borg would tell her, the Borg would say they programmed her to do everything a certain way, and she never had to make decisions. She never had to worry about what she wanted. And there's definitely something about too many choices. I say that I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up.
Hey, me neither.
Like, and I've seen it with my kids. They're requiring you to know younger and younger. It's like you shouldn't have this anxiety about what you're going to do for the rest of your life when you're 11, and yet they start talking about it then. And
if you were to ask my kid, he would tell you he wants to watch anime.
I'm not sure that's a career, but good luck for him to figure it out. I mean, in Star Trek's future, it could be a career. So, but yeah, and I think, I have a lot. I've spoken with some veterans, and I would love to work with them because I think that they have a lot to say, because they've seen things that not everybody has seen, but also they had that experience of really regimented, that you have to be a certain way, and then how do you balance that with outside? So it's really interesting to me. I think they're extremely strong people. So bringing it back to Dark Frontier, what's so amazing about that episode, I wouldn't even, it's not a great episode. There's a lot of things that are wrong with it. But what's right about it is that we get to see Seven's childhood and how she was this little girl with lots of promise and terrible parents.
Terrible parents. Dumb as a box of hammers parents. Oh my God. I remembered live tweeting that episode, just talking about how stupid they were and how awful they were. I felt so bad for her.
But, okay, fun fact, her father's name is Magnus. And my last name, I also chose. Dane is from Lorna Dane. It's from two characters. Lorna Dane, who is Magneto or Magnus's daughter in X-Men, but Dane is her adopted name. It's not his name. She was adopted, and so what I like to say is that she was adopted by Alexander Dane from Galaxy Quest. And so my name is a tribute to Lorna, Polaris, Magneto, and Alan Rickman in Galaxy Quest.
How beautiful you got all that tied in there. What a beautiful thing you've done for yourself.
But so one of the things we learned in Dark Frontier is that her father's name is Magnus, her terrible father. But so we get to see Seven as this innocent child full of promise, and we get to see Seven as a Borg, because she's brought back to the collective and she's fighting it. She doesn't want to be reassimilated, but she's like dealing with all this Borg stuff, and she's still, this is 5th season. She's still Borg. She's still as much Borg as she is human. She hasn't like crossed over yet. It's really this episode that starts her bridge to human. And we get to see Seven as just Seven, this person who's trapped in between those two worlds, and they're like physically there in the person of the Borg Queen and Captain Janeway fighting over her, but it comes down to her choice. She's the one who has to make the decision. And it's hard for Borg to make a decision. It's also hard for 7-year-olds to make a decision. So it's like this really intense moment. And then my first laptop was a Sony Vaio, and I painted it red because red was Seven's favorite color. And I had these clips of audio clips, and you could make your computer, like when it turns on, you can make it say whatever you wanted it. When it turns off, you can make it say whatever you wanted. So I had a lot of like Star Wars ones. So definitely like when I clicked shut down, it would say, if it's okay with you, I'm going to shut down for a while in 3PO's voice. But I got these audio clips from this episode of the Borg Queen saying two things. And the first was, I remember Anika, does she remember us? And that was obviously important to me because it said my name. And I liked that. And then the second one was, never forget who you are. And the fact that it's the Borg Queen and not Janeway saying, never forget who you are, makes that point to me about the Borg parts of Seven being her strength, that she doesn't have to give it up. She doesn't have to give up the good parts of being a Borg in order to be an individual. She can be the best Borg. And that's what I'm expecting in Picard, based on what little tiny bits that we've seen of her. When I saw her on screen, I literally burst into tears because she's my hero, and now she's back being that hero and saving all the damaged people and doing it her own way, not the Starfleet way, not the Borg way, just the Seven way. That's her thing. And I'm super excited, and I think it's proof that she never forgot who she was.
Anika, why does Star Trek matter to you?
Star Trek matters to me because it's something that I have from childhood, something that was given to me by my father, that I shared with my brothers, that I shared with my daughters, and has, throughout my life, at little different touchstones and moments, given me a character that I can use as armor to protect me and as fire to create me. And so that covers Ro Laren, it covers B'Elanna and Seven, it covers Katrina Cornwell. And it's amazing to me that we have so many years of this wonderful gift that keeps giving.
Well, I've enjoyed our conversation, Anika, and I hope you have as well. But I have to tell you that the M5 is furiously signaling me that it's time for the Kobayashi Maru. The Kobayashi Maru is a challenging and difficult test, cunningly prepared by the M5. Should you not only survive the test, but pass it as well, the M5 will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our podcast. Are you ready, Anika?
I'm ready.
M5, load the Kobayashi Maru simulator and prepare to record Anika's responses.
M5 working.
All right. Question 1. Choose your first Starfleet assignment, the Argus Array or Epsilon 9.
I'm going to go with Epsilon 9.
Which of these two is the worst Badmiral? Admiral Satie from TNG or Admiral Marcus from Into Darkness?
Ooh, yikes. That's rough. I'm going to go with Marcus. He's the worst.
Which place would you rather visit? Vagra 2, home of Armus, or Shakari from Star Trek V?
Definitely Shakari.
Question 4. Ephraim or Dot?
Aw. They're best together. Dot.
Worst quadrant, Delta, Gamma, or Beta?
Worst. Which, Delta, Gamma, or Beta? I don't know what Beta is, so... Beta.
Simulation complete. M5, please compute the results and tell us if our guest has passed the Kobayashi Maru.
Analyzing answers.
Gamma is where the wormhole goes, right? And
in
Delta
Deep Space
is
Nine.
obviously where they are in Voyager. What's Beta?
Well, Beta, there's a map, if you have an interest, you can actually look it up somewhere online, but there's actually a map of like where everybody is, and the Federation is like a large part of the Alpha Quadrant, and then like it spills over, if I'm going on memory here, but like it spills over or just borders the Beta Quadrant, and the Klingons and Romulans have a big presence in the Beta Quadrant.
Oh, I thought they
and then,
were
of course,
living with us in the Alpha Quadrant.
Well, they are, but it's sort of like an arbitrary line, just like there's a street outside your house, right? I mean, you're right next to each other, but there's a street in between, right? Think of it that way. It's like this border line, and it's just that's where the line is, but it's right there. So anyway, there you go. I'll put a link up to that in the show notes. So, all right, very good. Well, simulation complete. Anika, I am pleased to tell you that the M5 has calculated that you have passed the Kobayashi Maru simulation, so congratulations. And now, the M5, who has analyzed your answers, will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our podcast. M5, what title shall we award our guest?
Anika Dane is awarded the title of Ship's Counselor on the USS Challenger.
Yay! I accept.
Anika, please tell people how they can get in touch with you if they want to continue the conversation.
So you can find me on Twitter at Manic Pixie Dane. That's my name, Dane, and before it, Manic Pixie, like Manic Pixie Dream Girl. And if you go to manicpixiedust.com, you can find links to everywhere else. I'm mostly Pixie Dane at like Instagram and Facebook and all those various places. But you can find my YouTube, my AO3, and you can also find all of my fashion projects, all of my photo caps, and various "Look, it's me talking."
Fantastic. And Anika, thank you so much for being part of Trek Profiles.
Thank you. It was really wonderful.
Here ends this installment of the Trek Profiles podcast. And before we offer a Trek quote to close this episode, I'd like to remind you that you may send us your songs of praise for the show, your sonnets in praise of the perfect Hosperat, or selfie videos of yourself beatboxing while dressed as a Gorn to feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter at Trek Profiles. Anything you send us may be used in the show, or it may be hunted down to extinction by the Zot Vash. This week, I leave you with a quote from Captain Janeway, who in the episode Year of Hell said, quote, "With all due respect, unless you've got something a little bigger in your torpedo tubes, I'm not turning around." Close quote. Thanks for listening, and live long and prosper.
This handcrafted podcast is brought to you by Stars and Sky Media Lab. It's cosmic.
So do you like to watch like Walking Dead as like a pick-me-up?
No, but I have said that the Hannibal, not the television series, but the movie Hannibal is my feel-good movie.
Oh dear. I think we need to interrogate that for a moment. Say something about that.
So Clarice Starling is an amazing character who I love, and Silence of the Lambs is great and all, and Jodie Foster is great and whatever. But in Hannibal, she's really great because again, she's not the wonderkind who is being pulled out of the academy. She is poison, and she doesn't have anybody supporting her on her side, and she just has to keep going anyway, even though she should be a star by now. And no one believes her, and she has to, it's just Clarice Starling. And then at the very end of the movie, Hannibal tells her, you've been trying to get everyone's respect your entire life. You've been trying to get your father's respect and the people who raised you and the FBI. You just want them to acknowledge that you are one of them and that you're good enough. And the only thing you ever needed to know that you were good enough is a mirror, so you could look at yourself and say, hey, I'm good enough. And that is so powerful to me. So even though it's like a serial killer who's telling her it makes me feel better about my life. And I go look in my mirror and I say, yeah, that's all I ever needed. You got this, girl.
Well, I will say this. Anything with Julianne Moore makes me happy. So, right. Because she's amazingly stellar in, I think, every single thing she's ever been in.
And just as a fun, because it is related, on the DVD of one of the special features on the DVD of Hannibal is a hidden music video where they took the cut footage of the film and they put it to this creepy great song. And everyone should go watch that immediately. I'm sure it's on YouTube, and you should go watch it, and it's great. Speaking of telling a story with,
If you ever want to get your mind blown in like an incredibly beautiful way, I would recommend you go out and you get the Criterion Collection DVD of something called Vanya on 42nd Street. Have you ever seen this?
Yes. Amazing. Julianne Moore. Yeah.
Yes, right? Very young Julianne Moore. Mm-hmm. And of course, Wallace Shawn, Grand Nagus Zek, it's, and just the whole
amazing
premise behind what that is. And for those who don't know, I mean, this will probably end up in the bonus features, I guess, but for the episode, but these actors were getting together in New York just to practice acting in this decrepit, falling apart theater. And this was just for themselves. And eventually they started inviting a couple people to come watch them practice. And eventually Louis Malle, the great director, got involved, and he's like, hey, I want to film this. And that's what you're watching, is basically these bunch of incredible thespians practicing acting. And the way you're watching it, the movie starts, it's like out on the street. You see Wally Shawn getting a hot dog from a street cart, and and it's really him really getting a hot dog. It's not a scene. It's just they put a camera on him as he was walking in, and I'm just saying this for the benefit of people who are listening to this because you know this, but and then they just walk in and it just there's no like, okay, we're going to start the acting now. it just instantly falls into them doing this Chekhov play, which interestingly enough, Chekhov is also where Mr. Chekhov gets his name from TOS. So it has like all these amazing Star Trek tie-ins. And it's just an unbelievable thespian tour de force. And I would just recommend to anybody to go watch it.
I had to watch it for college. In college, I had to watch it for class because we were doing Uncle Vanya. I think I was playing for Julianne Moore's part. And,
oh, wow.
And so I like, we saw it and she said this, my acting teachers, said the same thing. It was like, this is just them doing their craft. And that's why it's so amazing. Like, that's what without any hoopla, it can create this amazing feeling in you.
Yeah, I mean they're wearing their street clothes. There's like a couple of props.
The story.
Yeah, it's just amazing. So I cannot say enough things about it. Unfortunately, I don't think it's available on any streaming. So if you want to watch it, I think you got to go get the DVD. I could be wrong about that, and that always changes. So it might be available now. But I remembered when I wanted to see it, the only place I could find it was at the library. I had to go check it out. So anyway, let's start talking about some more episodes. I'm sorry, we had a total diversion there. So if people are interested in that, they got to go check out the bonus. No, hey man, this is it's our hey sister, it's our show. We do what we want, right? I mean, it's there's no rules. There's no rules. So. Okay. I'm trying to see if I can find Catherine is Lonely.
Well, it was a GeoCities site, so you have to it's a saved in thing, but I could probably send you a link.
Oh no, I'm gonna find it.
Okay,
I'm gonna find it.
It went the GeoCities name was K is for kite, so it might come up under that.
K is for kite.
Yeah, I can't explain what that means. It was another anime. Kite was another anime, and it was like Kate. So in my head, it all made sense.
There is some really wild stuff out there. You should see what's coming up. I'm going to cut all this if I can't find it, but man, oh man. All right, I'll search for that later. But that's amazing.
And she has to go through so much, and she has to wrestle in
that cat. I see the cat in the background. The cat's going crazy. What's that cat's name?
That cat's name is Sushi.
Sushi?
Sushi the cat. Yes.
Okay. I'm writing that down on my clipboard.